Dad, guests are coming. You don't need that much space anymore. My son Jason stood in front of me with his hands in his pockets as if he had just asked me to move a chair. Behind him was the garage that had been turned into a bedroom. A folding bed sat against the wall where my workbench used to be. I looked at him for a moment and said nothing. What Jason didn't know was that I had already made a decision that would change everything. But I'll get to that later. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Walter Reynolds. I'm 71 years old, retired, and a widower. For most of my life, I believed that family was the most important investment a man could make. I spent 40 years building a construction company from the ground up. The work was hard, but it gave my family a comfortable life. My wife Linda and I raised 2 children, Jason and Emily. Jason was ambitious from a young age. He always wanted bigger things and bigger opportunities. Emily was different. She was kind, steady, and never asked for much. I loved them both equally. When Jason got into business school, I paid his tuition. When he wanted to start a company, I invested money to help him get started. When his business struggled, I stepped in again. I never kept score. That's what fathers do. Then Linda got sick. The cancer came suddenly and changed everything. For nearly a year, our lives revolved around hospitals, treatments, and hope. When she passed away, the house became painfully quiet. For the first time in decades, I was alone. Emily called often. Jason called too, but his conversations were usually shorter. Most of the time, he talked about business, investments, or property. I noticed the difference, but I told myself he was simply busy. One afternoon, Jason came over and sat with me on the back patio. "Dad," he said, looking around the property, "this house is too much for one person." I laughed. "Maybe, but I've managed so far." He nodded. "I've been thinking, what if we moved in? The kids would be around more. You wouldn't have to be alone." The idea sounded good. After Linda's death, loneliness had become my biggest challenge. Having family around again seemed like exactly what I needed. Then, Jason mentioned estate planning. He explained that transferring part ownership of the house now would make things easier. Later, I wasn't an expert in legal matters, so I trusted him. He was my son. A few days later, I told Emily about the plan. She listened quietly before asking one question. "Why does ownership need to change right now?" I didn't have a clear answer. I simply repeated what Jason had told me. Emily looked concerned. Before leaving, she hugged me and said, "Just be careful, Dad." At the time, I thought she was worrying too much. Within a few months, Jason, his wife Nicole, and their children moved into the house. At first, everything felt wonderful. The house was full of life again. There was laughter in the kitchen, footsteps in the hallways, and noise coming from every room. For a while, I felt less lonely. Then small things started. Changing furniture Linda had chosen disappeared. Family photographs were taken, down and replaced with newer decorations. Rooms were rearranged, without anyone asking my opinion. Whenever I questioned something, Jason would smile and say, "Dad, we're just updating things." It sounded harmless, but gradually, I noticed another change. Decisions were being made before I even heard about them. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found renovation plans spread across the counter. "What are these?" I asked. Jason barely looked up. "Just some improvements." "To the house?" "Yeah." He said it as though the house belonged equally to everyone. Something about that bothered me. Not enough to start an argument, just enough to stay in my mind. Over the next few months, that feeling grew stronger. The house still had my name on it. I still paid most of the bills. I still maintained the property. Yet somehow, I felt less like the owner and more like a guest. And the most troubling part was that Jason never demanded control. He simply acted as if he already had it. At the time, I didn't realize those small changes were the beginning of something much bigger. Thought we were adjusting to a new family arrangement. Had no idea I was slowly losing my place inside the home I had spent a lifetime building. When Jason's family first moved in, I kept telling myself that change was normal. After all, 5 people living in one house would naturally require adjustments. But over time, those adjustments started feeling one-sided. Family meetings happened without me. Plans were made before anyone asked my opinion. would walk into conversations halfway through and realize decisions had already been finalized. Whenever I questioned something, Jason had the same answer. Dad, we're just trying to make things easier. The strange thing was that everything became easier for everyone except me. A few months later, I noticed another change. The grandchildren stopped spending time in my workshop. Before moving in, they loved visiting. I taught them how to use tools, build birdhouses, and repair old furniture. Now they were always busy. Soccer practice, birthday parties, weekend trips. Something always seemed to come up. I missed them, but I didn't complain. I didn't want to become the grandfather who demanded attention. One Saturday morning, I invited everyone to breakfast. Nobody came. Jason and Nicole had already taken the kids out. No one had mentioned it. I sat alone at the table staring at 5 empty chairs. That was the first time I truly felt like a visitor. The distance continued, growing. Jason still talked to me regularly, but almost every conversation involved money, property, or future planning. Dad, have you updated the insurance policy? Dad, where are the tax documents? Dad, we should review the estate paperwork. Sometimes an entire week would pass without him asking how I was doing. The relationship felt different, less personal, more transactional. One evening, Emily came over for dinner. After everyone left the table, she stayed behind while I washed dishes. You okay? She asked. Of course. She looked at me carefully. You don't sound convinced. I forced a smile. Everything's fine. But she wasn't fooled. She had always been able to read me better than anyone else. Before leaving, she squeezed my shoulder. If you ever need anything, call me. Simple words. But somehow they meant more than all the estate planning conversations I'd had with Jason. A few weeks later, I returned from a golf outing and immediately knew something was wrong. The master bedroom door was open. Inside, workers were moving furniture. I stood frozen. What is going on? Nicole appeared from the hallway. Oh, Jason didn't tell you? Tell me what? We thought it would be better if the kids had more space. Upstairs. I looked around the room. My room, the room Linda and I had shared for decades. Family photographs had been removed. Furniture was being rearranged. My chest tightened. That evening I confronted Jason. You moved my things without asking me. He sighed as if I were being unreasonable. Dad, the family needs the room more than you do. I stared at him. This was my bedroom. It still is. Technically. Technically. That word stayed with me all night. Over the next month, things got worse. One afternoon, I walked toward my home office and found the door locked. When Jason finally opened it, I barely recognized the room. My desk was gone. My filing cabinets had disappeared. Video game equipment filled the space. The office where I had run my company for years had become a game room. You converted my office? Jason shrugged. The kids wanted a place to hang out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not because of the room itself, because nobody had even bothered asking. For the first time, I seriously considered moving out, but part of me still hoped things would improve. Part of me still believed Jason would realize how far things had gone. Then came the family gathering. Several relatives had come over for dinner. Everyone was sitting around the table laughing and talking. One point I mentioned feeling a little crowded lately. Wasn't angry. I wasn't accusing anyone. I was simply being honest. Jason leaned back in his chair and laughed. Then he said something I'll never forget. Dad, you're lucky we let you stay here. Most people your age end up in assisted living. The room instantly became silent. Nobody laughed. Nobody responded. I looked around the table. Several people avoided eye contact. Others stared down at their plates. No one defended me. No one told him he had crossed a line. I felt more alone in that crowded dining room than I had felt after Linda died. That night I sat awake for hours. For the first time, I started wondering if Emily had been right all along. Maybe this had never been about family. Maybe it had never been about helping me. Maybe it had been about something else entirely. A few weeks later, I discovered just how wrong things could become, because Jason had already decided that my room was needed for guests, and according to him, there was only one place left for me: the garage. The garage had once been my workshop. For years, it was where I built furniture, repaired tools, and spent quiet evenings working with my hands. Now a folding bed stood where my workbench used to be. A small dresser sat against the wall. That was it. Jason stood beside me with his hands in his pockets. "Dad, guests are coming next month. We need the bedroom." I looked around the garage. "You want me to live here? It's temporary." His answer came too quickly. We both knew it wasn't temporary. I nodded once. Then I carried my last box inside and closed the door. That night I sat on the edge of the folding bed and stared at the concrete floor. For the first time, everything became clear. Jason never wanted to take care of me. He wanted control, the ownership transfer, the renovations, the bedroom, the office. None of it was accidental. The moment he believed part of the house belonged to him, he stopped treating me like his father. He started treating me like an obstacle. Something changed inside me that night. Not anger, not revenge, acceptance. I stopped trying to earn respect from someone who had already decided I didn't deserve it. What Jason didn't know was that 3 months earlier, I had quietly met with an attorney. At first, I only wanted a routine review of my estate documents. But after noticing the changes in the house, I started asking questions. A lot of questions. The attorney reviewed every document Jason had encouraged me to sign. Then, he pointed out something important. The ownership transfer wasn't as permanent as Jason believed. Certain legal provisions still gave me significant authority. Over the following weeks, I made several decisions. Quiet decisions, no arguments, no warnings. I reversed the ownership arrangement. I moved my assets into a protected trust. I updated my will. I purchased a smaller home near Emily, and I removed Jason from every position of future authority over my estate. I never told him. I simply waited. The final confirmation came 2 weeks after I moved into the garage. Jason walked in carrying renovation plans. We're thinking about expanding the upstairs next year. I looked at him and realized he was already planning a future based on ownership. He didn't actually have. A month later, legal notices began arriving. At first, Jason ignored them. Then he started asking questions. Then he started getting nervous. Finally, he confronted me. "Dad, what's going on with the property records?" I calmly folded my newspaper. "What do you mean? The ownership documents are different." I nodded. "Yes." His face tightened. "What did you do?" For a long moment, I simply looked at him. Then I answered. "I protected what I built." The color drained from his face. Over the next hour, I explained everything. The transfer had been reversed. The trust controlled the estate. The house belonged entirely to me, and Emily would oversee everything after I was gone. Jason sat, speechless. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. Then something remarkable happened. Suddenly he wanted to talk. Suddenly, he wanted family dinners. Suddenly, he wanted to spend time together. Phone calls became frequent. Invitations appeared every week. Apologies followed. But the timing told me everything. He hadn't changed when I lost my bedroom. He
hadn't changed when I moved into the garage. He
changed when control disappeared. That was the real revelation. The kindness wasn't for me. It was for what he thought he had lost. A few months later, I listed the house for sale. Jason argued. Nicole argued. Everyone had opinions. For years, their opinions had shaped my life. This time, they didn't. The house sold quickly. I packed my belongings and moved into my new home near Emily. On moving day, she arrived early with her husband and children. Together, we carried boxes inside. Family photographs were carefully placed on shelves. Linda's favorite chair sat beside a sunny window. For the first time in years, the house felt peaceful, not because it was bigger, because I was wanted there. Later that afternoon, I watched through the window as the final paperwork was completed on the old property. Jason stood silently nearby. The future he had been planning vanished with a few signatures. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. simply felt free before leaving. Jason approached me. Dad, I made mistakes. I nodded. Yes. You did? I'm sorry. I believed he was sorry, but some lessons arrived too late to undo the damage. I placed my new house keys into my pocket and looked. Around the room, Emily was laughing with the grandchildren. Family photos covered the walls. For the first time since Linda died, I felt at home again. I learned something important through all of it. The people who truly love you make room for you before they know what you can give them. And respect is never inherited. It's earned by how you treat the people who built the foundation beneath your feet.